Tonight, we look at the story that has been told about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey and why so many think her parents guilty, and what this tells us about the America she so briefly lived in.
This is my final interview.
Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, what do you want to say to the killer of your daughter?
We'll find you. We will find you. I have that as a sole mission for the rest of my life.
For each of you, has time changed anything?
Well, yeah, we continue to hope that a serious, hard investigation will take place. Well, the number one mistake was, there's all sorts of mistakes, and we didn't know it at the time, but the fundamental mistake was that they rushed to a conclusion.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 27 in the ongoing series on JonBenet Ramsey. In this episode, we're going to look at the latest statements made by John and John and John Andrew, who recently appeared on CNN on the 25th anniversary. They appeared on Extra TV on the 24th anniversary of JonBenet's death. During their brief television appearance, the attractive host miscalculates the number of years since JonBenet's death 24 years ago as the 25th anniversary. It sort of shows that she's not that familiar with the case, and perhaps that is why they are comfortable in this setting. John Andrew sets the record straight on that score, but it shows the caliber of journalists that's involved and also the caliber of the platform that's currently airing Ramsey Apologia. I don't think that is for nothing. Previous platforms got sued, and we're going to get to that in a second. Before we get to that, a big thank you to the 200 or so people who've subscribed to the channel in the last day or so. If you haven't subscribed yet, please click the blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. It is interesting when John Ramsey is asked, what has happened over this period of time? Are you happy with what has happened? It's quite interesting how he responds to that question. Let's listen in.
It's been 25 years since this all happened, and the murder of JonBenet remains unsolved. For each of you, has time changed anything?
Well, yeah.
Does that sound like a convincing response? That after 24 years, has time changed anything? And I think the honest answer is no. The case is still unsolved. There's still, on paper, an ongoing investigation, and it's still the same, different day. So, nothing, it's not surprising that John's response there, he sort of looks down, pauses for quite a long time, and sort of says, in kind of a choked way, yeah, kind of thing. And I kind of want to just highlight John's response in a bit more detail, where he talks about how they want to keep the investigation alive and how he criticizes the Boulder police. John Andrew does the same. And of course, the best way to get the case going is to kind of go to the police station and knock on the door and say, what's happening? And it's quite a simple question. Is that happening? Have the Ramseys been talking to the police? Have the police been talking to the Ramseys? What do you think the answer is to that? And do you think it's helpful to criticize the police when you need their help? Do you think it's helpful 24 years later? Is it going to, you need law enforcement to enforce the law. Does it help to criticize them and insult them? And one of the things John Andrew says is that they don't have kind of a heart. Let me get the proper quote. He says, the reality is the Boulder police don't have the heart. And I think he means to investigate the case properly. This is a quote from Detective Steve Thomas on August the 7th, 1998, and it's an excerpt from his letter of resignation to Boulder Police Sheriff Beckner. This is what he wrote. If ever there was a case, and if ever there were a victim who truly meant something to the detectives pursuing the truth, this is it. If not this case, what case? Until such time an independent prosecutor is appointed to oversee this case, I will not be part of this. What went on was simply wrong. And that's a quote from Detective Steve Thomas. Now, whatever you may say about Detective Steve Thomas, you might smear him with the same brush as Boulder PD, but his problem is with the prosecutor. His problem is with a prosecutor that he doesn't seem to feel is independent. And what is the backstory that the whole arc of the whole narrative show us is that the case went to trial, and no matter what you say about the quality of the investigation, so you might rightly talk about Linda Arendt mismanaging or not that she could have managed the crime scene better. You could talk about Steve Thomas pursued Patsy Ramsey as his prime suspect wrongly. You could talk about how ridiculous it was that Patsy would have killed JonBenet after bedwetting incident. But if he'd known how resigned Patsy had been to the bedwetting, he probably would have revised his motive and his suspect list. But to say that the Boulder PD didn't make an effort or didn't put any heart into it. Do you know by October 1997, Boulder PD had over 1,600 people in their persons of interest index, and a lot of that came from the Ramseys themselves. Look at Santa, look at Fleet White, look at this one, look at that one, and all of them ended up being dead ends. And of course, if they didn't look into every single possibility, then the Boulder police aren't doing their work. And it was exactly the same with the McCanns. The McCanns would direct the police. Now, bear in mind, both the McCanns and the Ramseys were this sort of respected, well-to-do family, and so obviously the police would say, okay, we'll take our cue from you, little knowing that could there be something that they don't know about. In the McCann case, they found critical evidence inside the apartment, and the police felt that they'd been led on a wild goose chase. So I think Kolar did better than Steve Thomas. But even his scenario, lashing out over a piece of pineapple seems overly simplistic to me, and it doesn't address the sexual interference side that preceded the crime, like immediately preceded the crime. But while there are valid criticisms of the Boulder cops, that's not why the Ramseys case is unsolved 24 years later. It's unsolved because of a lack of will, a lack of conviction, and a lack of follow-through from the district attorney at the time. We know exactly what happened there. Something about there's insufficient evidence at this time, blah, blah, blah. Remember that. That comes from a lack of will, a lack of conviction, a lack of follow-through, and probably a lack of quite a few other things. And it's not just the district attorney at the time, it's all the district attorneys since who could have reactivated the investigation and taken the case to trial. What I want to emphasize here is you can make a whole list of criticisms of the Boulder PD, and they are justified. You could say they could have done this, they should have done that, whatever. But ultimately, there was a grand jury trial, and the jurors didn't feel that there was a lack of evidence. The jurors issued indictments based on what they were told, and the grand jury trial, unless I'm mistaken, went on for 13 months. You could argue that it went on for 18 months if you include, I think there was a 6-month delay. But the point I'm trying to make is, if there was no evidence, if the Boulder PD did nothing, then what do you think happened during that grand jury trial that lasted for 13 months? What evidence was led during that trial? And of course, very convenient for some of the people in this case, the details of the grand jury trial are kind of withheld. We don't really know. We do know who testified during the trial. We know that Some of the people who testified included Linda Hoffman Pugh, the housekeeper. Burke Ramsey testified. Doug Stein, Burke's best friend, testified. Fleet White testified. Lou Smith testified. John Douglas testified, and so on and so on and so on. But we don't know the substance so much of that testimony unless you go to an article that was written about what Linda Hoffman Pugh said was sort of spoken about during that hearing, the grand jury trial. Now, what is very interesting about her position, I don't think her position is correct, because the housekeeper also believed that it was sort of like a thing of, I think whoever wrote the ransom note did this, and so I think Patsy wrote the ransom note, so Patsy did this. It's that kind of thinking. And I think there's another possibility if you're going to, go down that route. The thing is, what Linda Hoffman Pugh said in this sort of expose was that the grand jury trial kind of in general focused on Patsy. According to what she knew, it focused on Patsy. And so that is kind of leading you in a certain direction. Was it focusing on John Mark Carr? Was it focusing on Michael Helgoth or whatever his name was? Or where was the focus in terms of the jurors themselves? And we only know what they decided based on the kind of innovative and sort of the persevering efforts of a particular Boulder journalist from the Daily Camera, Charlie Brennan. If he didn't fight to get this information out, we would have assumed that the grand jury were sort of undecided, but they weren't. The person who was sort of undecided, I wouldn't even say he was undecided, who was opposed to the case going forward, appeared to be the person in charge of the whole thing. And a very good question is why? Why wouldn't you want this case to go to trial? And I think then you would have to take that thinking further. And I think it's, oddly enough, I think it's the same reason the Chris Watts case didn't go to trial, because it would put certain interests under the spotlight that certain people didn't want exposed. So I'm not going to take it further than that in this YouTube part of the episode. I will be going into it in more detail. It is a bit of a sensitive subject on Patreon. So if you wish to hear it, head on to patreon.com/TCRS. It's on the $2 tier. And there another, I think it's 23 episodes remaining in this series. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. So let's be clear, when you're talking about Hunter's assertion that there was insufficient evidence to proceed to trial, it's actually ludicrous. At the time